This is the Kitchen Sink WP Podcast, episode 244.
I program my home computer.
We have a server crash, 404 error, page not found, links aren't working, system is crashing, system is crashing, system is crashing.
Your old HTML website, barely alive. We have the technology. We have WordPress. A new website, better than it was before. Better, stronger, faster. We have the technology. The technology.
Why, hello everybody, this is Adam Silver, the host of the Kitchen Sink WP Podcast. Thanks for being here. Let's get started. All right, upcoming events. We have a handful here. WordCamp Capetown, November 1st and 2nd. WordCamp Portland in Oregon, November 3rd. And I say Oregon because the same weekend is also WordCamp Portland, Maine, November 3rd. And I might have mentioned I was going to try to go to that, and I'm not going to be able to make it after all. Sorry to the organizers, my buddy Chris Badgett up there. My daughter has a senior night, so I'm going to be going to that instead. Family first, people. All right, also WordCamp Riverside. My friend Benjamin Smith III is the lead organizer there, November 3rd and 4th, and Greg Franklin's on that team, and it's going to be a great camp, I'm sure. Not going to make it. And last but not least, WordCamp Kochi, also November 3rd. So if you're in those areas, you should definitely go to WordCamps, as I always say. And I have more on that in a minute here in the meat potatoes. So moving on, segment 1. In the news, also some stuff here to talk about. WordPress 5.0 Beta 1 is now available. You should definitely check that out because inside of that is Gutenberg. It's coming. It's going to be here in like a week or so, week and a half from the recording of this episode. Additionally, other news, Atomic Blocks. So I mentioned Atomic Blocks, I believe half a dozen episodes ago, or maybe more, maybe a dozen episodes back. They make blocks for Gutenberg. The company behind it was actually acquired by WP Engine. Array Themes is now part of the WP Engine family. There's a link in the show notes to the blog post over at WP Engine as well. And lastly, in the news, the education source Upcase is now free. So Upcase is was a subscription learning platform for developers. It is now free and open to the public. It includes videos, flashcards, coding exercises, etc. Pretty cool. I hadn't heard about this until recently. Someone mentioned it to me in passing, and then I saw something on a Twitter feed, I believe. Yeah, about Upcase now being free. So that's pretty cool. So there you have it. That's the news of the week. Moving on to the meat potatoes segment 2. This week, I'm talking about my all things open experience. So what that means is if you've listened to this podcast for any length of time, you know that I'm a fan of going to meetups and WordCamps. It's a great way to meet new people, IRL, in real life, strengthen friendships over the years, and of course, make new connections, both for personal purposes and for business. And I've mentioned this also to people in passing that out of the 8,000 images I have on my iPhone, at least 50% of them are from WordPress conferences, connections, travels, vacations, etc. So what about other conferences, though? WordPress-specific conferences. Are those worth attending? Well, the short answer is yes. Of course they are. And then, of course, there are offshoots of conferences in the WordPress space for bloggers, for WooConf, like there's WooConf, LoopConf, Pressnomics. I've been to a few of those myself. But let's say you wanted to go to something that is not necessarily WordPress-specific, but still in an interesting and yet open source type driven community. So this past week, I attended my first non-WordPress conference in over 4 years. The last thing I went to was the NTC conference where I spoke about WordPress, but it was the national, actually, what is it? I don't know what it even stands for. It's like a nonprofit. That's right, the Nonprofit Technology Conference, I believe. So I went to the All Things Open conference. And what's interesting about ATO is that it is an open source based conference. And as WordPress is open source, you would think there'd be a stronger connection there. But sadly, there wasn't. And we'll get to that a little bit in a little bit later of this information, this experience that I had. But what I wanted to share was my takeaways from attending a non-WordPress/WordCamp specific event in this community of all things. So the conference was local to me. It was here in Raleigh, so that was extremely convenient. I actually paid for it. I paid out of my own pocket. I applied to speak, wasn't selected, totally fine. I still bought a ticket. The ticket that I got on early bird ticket pricing was $100. And it was worth it. Yeah, so I'll cut to that right off the bat. It was worth it, absolutely. It was held on a Monday and Tuesday versus a standard WordPress weekend that we typically have in our world. And I think having something midweek, Monday, Tuesday, or Thursday, Fridays, or even the whole week brings a different type of audience to any conference versus weekends. Weekends, it's just different. It's a different feel. It's a different purpose. And then the cost of that ticket is also different as well. So, and also for the first time, All Things Open had a free Sunday as an inclusion event. And you can also register early, get your badge, your swag bag, all that kind of stuff. And the inclusion event was really interesting. I attended that on Sunday. I heard 4 shorter talks about inclusion and diversity in the open source community and the world at large. And it was really, really engaging. They also had a Q&A panel after that and some breakouts that people spoke to. I couldn't stick around for all of it because it was late in the afternoon and it was on a Sunday, so I wanted to be home and we were having dinner, etc. So, but it was very interesting on doing that. So moving past that, before I left on Monday morning back for the Raleigh Convention Center, I made a decision. I chose not to take my laptop. I wanted to really be present and meet new people and not be working, be my face behind a screen, which happens. You go to a conference sometimes, you're like, I'll take my laptop, I can continue to do some work, I can work on a website, I can answer emails, but I didn't want that to be the case. Truth be told, I was a little nervous. I'm still new in North Carolina. I don't know a whole lot of people, and this conference has 2,000 plus attendees. So it turns out that I actually found that I knew 5 people. That was kind of neat because it's always nice to see a familiar face, right? It's refreshing, like, oh, hey, I do know that person. And the first person I saw was Frank, who is in the WordPress space. I know him from the meetup in Raleigh. And the other issue there was I didn't know him that well. So this was a kind of neat because I got to actually spend some time with him and learn about what he really does. And totally cool guy. And we're better friends now because of it. So anyway, on the non-laptop, it was super liberating, I got to tell you the truth. All I brought was a small pocket notebook. Mine was from WordCamp Miami, and I bought a pen and the schedule. Speaking of the schedule, it was amazing. Okay, you think having 3 tracks of 5 to 6 talks at a WordCamp is tough to manage? Imagine this, 21 tracks each day with 5 talks in each track. That's 100 speakers a day, each day, so 200 speakers. I can't even fathom how that was to schedule and figure that out. The schedules were printed on 11 by 17 sheets of paper, were broken up into top and bottom sections. The tracks had topics ranging from 101, front-end development, back-end development, big data, cloud, education, machine learning, hardware IoT standing for Internet of Things, mobile, DevOps. I mean, there was obviously 21 tracks. So I do have a lot of interests, and I was drawn to the areas that made the most sense for me, that being community, business, some UI, UX. So the fact that they weren't recorded also caused a slight issue. You had to pick wisely because you couldn't go back and see something else. You can get the slides from the speakers who would share them, but you didn't have the actual presentation, them presenting it live on any type of video format. That would be a lot of video to edit, I'm sure. So it was just tough. It was hard to pick at one aspect. I did notice though, every session that I did attend was packed, sometimes standing room only. So also really cool. People were very engaged in attending the sessions. Not so much, I think the hallway track wasn't not the same type of thing as a WordCamp because it's so big, and maybe that's what it was. So there were a bunch of keynotes, short version types of keynotes, almost not a flash talk, maybe a little longer, but those were both on Monday and Tuesday in the mornings. And the standouts really were, I'm going to mention these ones by name. There was one called Bring the Cavalry, Design in Open Source by Una Kravitz, I think. Burr Sutter, Director of Developer Education at Red Hat. His talk was Enter the Service Mesh. Nina Zacharano, she's a cloud developer at Microsoft, and she talked about 5 things you didn't know Python can do. I got to tell you, Python looks really cool to me. There were some talks about Python. I'm like, I might check that out. I really do. I think it's a pretty fascinating looking language. So who else? Henry Zhu, he's a maintainer at Babel, and he wrote The Maintainer's Virtue. Pretty cool. He spoke about that. And then lastly, on the keynotes, Andres Antopoulos, I don't know if I'm pronouncing his last name right, he did a keynote, a much longer version, like about a 40-minute keynote on Tuesday called Money as an Open Protocol. Very well spoken, very well presented about blockchain, and it was really interesting. Really, it was. And as of the talks, I can only go to 5 a day technically. A couple of the presentations that really stood out to me were the CSS as a service, and this one not so much as a SaaS, but more of a hub for a large company with multiple websites and needs to have consistency across the branding using CSS. It was really interesting. Another one that was awesome was Jennifer Wadella, 10 Commandments of Community Organizing, and I think I might have to take a spin of that on my own. Might come up with my own future talk based on her talk. So And yeah, and then also my friend Elisa and Christina, Elisa Hare, she was interviewed here on this podcast back on episode, I don't remember, 240. Oh, here it is. 237. So she spoke as well with Christina about being a B Corp. Also very cool. So yeah, just a lot to take in. It's almost overwhelming. And I usually thrive at these conferences, but by Tuesday afternoon, I was like, wow, this is just crazy. Like most conferences, they had sponsors and vendor booths, and it was impressive. Automatic was actually a sponsor, but due to some scheduling internally, they couldn't send anyone to work the table and hand out any type of swag, which was kind of a bummer. And the only other familiar sponsor from the WordPress type of the world was WP Engine, actually. And I didn't know any of those reps that were there, but I became friends with them real quick, and we talked about stuff. And I definitely think there's opportunity for other companies in the WordPress space to be there in future years. I mean, it's been going on for 6 years. There should be definitely some more integrations there. Not to be a WordPress, WordCamp experience, but definitely it's part of the open source. It's there, right? And then meeting people. Like I said, I was nervous, but me being me, I'm fairly friendly. I met a handful of people, and a couple of people I want to mention were James Chamberlain, who apparently runs the IBM GitHub repo, which is the largest Git repo outside of GitHub Public, which is pretty cool. And also met a woman by the name of Sarah. She works at North Carolina State University. They use Drupal, but she works with the UX and UI within that specialty. And we wound up discussing something that I didn't see coming. We talked about inclusion and accidental racism. And then the story came up about the soap dispenser that doesn't see darker skin. And this is what I love about communities in general. Our community, open source, is that these conversations happen. And I learned something I had no idea that existed. So I'll link to that in the show notes as well. There's a post over at Gizmodo. I looked it up. So pretty cool. All right. So finally, I met Todd. Todd, who runs the conference. He's a super, super nice guy. He couldn't be more down to earth, more just humble about what he's done. And he wants the best for the open source community, which leads us to discuss why wasn't there more representation from WordPress. He did reach out to Automatic. He's been trying to get Matt to keynote. Hasn't worked out yet. I'm going to see if I can help with that. And he's totally open to having Raleigh WordPress meetup as a part of the conference. Let's say after the first night, we could have an event there, which is very cool. I'm going to work on that as well for maybe next year. Lastly, the speakers to present on WordPress topics, there's a huge opportunity there. A beginner track, an advanced track. I'm not trying to take this over by any stretch, but I think WordPress being an open source for 15 years, it's come a long way, and people just don't know what it can do or what the opportunity is there. So that is my experience. It was a good one, a great one, I would actually go to say. I'm looking forward to going next year, and maybe I'll be a speaker next year. Who knows? I also did mention that to Todd that I think ATO should travel. I think there's a demand and a definite need to take this show on the road, and he said that things are in the works there. So there's a good chance that you may see all things open coming to the West Coast, going to the Midwest. Who knows? So lastly, I only took the one shirt that they gave me, part of the swag, the ATO shirt. I didn't grab anything else for swag, nothing. So I'm just trying to limit the stuff I have. It's just one of those things where it's, I didn't bring a backpack. Like I said, just a little pad of paper and my phone, and that was in a pen. That was awesome. So I recommend going to other conferences, not just WordCamps and WordPress specific things. Get out of the comfort zone, meet new people, and see what else you can pick up and help share what you know about WordPress to that community as well. So there you go. All right, moving on to segment 3, the tip and tool of the week. This week's tool is called 30 Seconds of CSS. It's a cool website. I'm not sure where I found this one. I think I saw this also in Twitter or maybe Facebook. It's a curated collection of useful CSS snippets you can understand in 30 seconds or less. It's free. It's pretty darn cool. So check that out. It's over at the domain is actually 30-seconds. It's long at .github.io. I'll just link to it in the show notes. 30 seconds of CSS, or you can probably just Google that as well. So pretty cool. Okay, moving on. Actually, that's it. We're going to wrap it up. So if you have any questions, go ahead and send it in via email, adam@KitchensinkWP.com, or use that SpeakPipe function on the website. If you want to support the show, you can become a Patreon, KitchensinkWP.com/Patreon. That's Patreon. If you want to sponsor the show, you can do that too. There's a form on the website. Thanks so much for listening. See you next week. Go out and do some awesome things with WordPress. All right, bye-bye.